Hey everyone, welcome to the Tom's Hardware Apple M2 analysis show. Apple had their big reveal this past week. I'm here with Paul Alcorn, and we are going to dissect what Apple has revealed, discuss the highs and the lows, the vague, unclear benchmarks. Hey, it's 35% faster. We don't know on what benchmark, but it's 35% faster. Paul, how's it going?
Pretty good. Busy day.
So, Apple, tell me what your high level overview of the M2 announcement.
Well, that's kind of hard to just throw. I mean, it's hard to make all encompassing statements upon the chip. What we're seeing is the same number of cores. You have 8 cores, 4 efficiency, and 4 high performance cores. The performance gains on those cores actually are not all that impressive. And that's because what they've done is they've just moved forward in an almost iterative up. It is absolutely an iterative update over their original architecture. So, Apple is giving us all types of different claims. So with the previous generation, they had Firestorm performance cores and Ice Storm efficiency cores. They're moving forward to what looks like the next gen Avalanche performance cores and Blizzard performance cores. So these are ARM V8.5A cores, not ARM V9. They're based on the A15 architecture. Now we know from A14 to A15 in the standard ARM architecture that you get very slim IPC gains on the performance cores, almost none. But the efficiency cores are quite a bit more performant. You get a bit more of a performance gain there, which is why Apple shares with us performance gains in a multi-core workload compared to its previous gen chips. The benchmarks that they're sharing when they say, oh, it's 18% faster, everybody's like, oh, 18% more IPC or 18% more single thread performance. Neither of those statements are true. It's 18% in a multi-threaded workload, and a large portion of that gain is simply going to come from the improvements in the efficiency cores. So I wouldn't expect any meaningful advance when you're looking at single-threaded performance. Now, Alder Lake from Intel is challenging and beating the M1 at higher power levels in single-threaded performance. And of course, Intel isn't standing still. So this doesn't bode well for the Apple's competitiveness, or at least these huge gains they have over everybody. They're not going to extend from one huge gain to one other massive gain. It's a bit of a smaller gain, and their competitors are catching ground. So or making up some ground, quite a bit, as a matter of fact. And, the Zen 3 does lag in single-threaded performance by quite a bit, but Zen 4 is right around the corner. So they could be more competitive.
And I think iterative is a good statement for what Apple has done here. Like, the big thing for me with the M1 is that it was the first TSMC N5 processor to hit the market. First 5 nanometer. That's a big deal. And it gave them a huge advantage over their competition. There's no N3 right now. It's not ready. It's not out yet. So this is like optimized 5 nanometer. And
it's second gen. It's called N5P, and N5P basically gives you either 7% faster performance or 15% better power efficiency. Now that's on a curve, so you can't have both. You can't say, oh, I'm going to be 7% faster and get 15% better performance efficiency. You don't get both at the same time. This is a curve. So you get some. You're going to dial it in where you want on that voltage frequency curve. It looks like they landed somewhere near the middle, maybe even towards the low side, trying to focus on power efficiency. And why would they need to do that? They would need to do that because that process does not offer more density, but the die is larger because they use 25% more transistors. So you get a die that's like 18% larger with 25% more transistors. So I would bet a lot of money that the majority of the improvements from N5P, they're choosing to leverage efficiency rather than performance because they don't have a choice. Look at that.
Yeah, you mentioned the die. We've got their shots showing M1 next to M2. Yes. It's a bigger chip, basically similar process node, and this is interesting.
Same, yes.
Yeah, this is interesting too. Like, This is the M1 lineup: M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, M1 Ultra. Like even if we forget about the basically dual chip M1 Ultra, the M1 the M2 lands in between the M1 and the M1 Pro. It's
Think of how
it's
big
not
the
going to
M2
be
Pro is
faster.
going to be. Yes.
Yeah, M2 Pro could be a lot bigger. I'm now seeing rumors. People are talking. They're like, Apple's going to do. They're going to be the first on TSMC 3 nanometer with the M2 Pro and M2 Max. And I'm like, that seems unlikely because they would have to like redo all the cores and all that stuff for a new process
Yeah.
node. That's a lot of work.
Yes.
You don't just port it and it's done. It's like you port it and then you
You spend a
do a
year.
bunch of
You
a bunch
spend
of
a
effort.
year on like RTL optimizations. Yeah.
Yeah. And
The
it's not
architecture.
impossible. They could be doing that, right?
Yeah, the
But
architecture itself has to be designed to support that specific process because even things like there are so many factors. It has to be tailor made, and if it is ported, port is very loosely used if you're going to a different process. Like port is typically used when you're saying, "Oh, well, I'm going from N5 to N5P." You're going from N5P to N3. That's a watch out for that first step. It's a big one, right? Because
yeah,
even the instruction timing for the various stages of the pipeline inside of the cores, all of that has to be tailored specifically for the process. And the density library, yeah, it's going to take a lot more work. It's going to be extremely hard. They did suffer quite a bit of brain drain. They're top engineers. You can read plenty of talk about this. There are some really good articles on it. A lot of their top engineers have left and are at Nubia. They went to Qualcomm is where they ended up. They originally all came from Nubia. Now they're at Qualcomm. I just don't see this happening yet. I could be wrong, but
okay, so I want to talk about the die a little bit. This is the big
GPU.
shot.
So one thing that's important to understand here
Hey,
is that they have given you 2 more cores on the GPU. Sorry.
yes. Yeah, so that was a big, for me as a graphics guy, that's the big change. They added 2 GPU cores. I've gone ahead and done my little own annotation of this die. Errors are mine, best guess. So you can see these little blocks of the GPU cores. There's a bunch of logic tying the two sides together, but you can see there's clearly the 10 GPU blocks sitting above L3 cache, DDR5 memory controllers up top. P cores, they doubled the L2 cache size, I think, on the P cores. Is that right?
That is correct. That's a standard architectural enhancement for A15.
Yeah. So that's a big change. You can see again, like without the annotations, you can kind of see things a little better. And then the E cores, a lot smaller than the P cores, and then they have their own dedicated 4 MB L2 cache. And below those, the neural engine has been reworked significantly. At least in the way it appears on the die shot. And how accurate is the die shot? Tough to
But
say.
they do claim that they went from 11 tops teraops of performance with the first gen to 15.8. Now, this is one area where it seems that they are pouring a lot more of their development efforts into some of these specialized areas of silicon, which are just hardware optimized for certain types of features. And that's smart. That's a general trend that we're seeing in the industry.
Yeah, like everyone seems to be adding, whether they call them neural engines or AI cores or tensor cores or whatever. It's all the same ideas. Like, hey, there's certain things AI specifically and machine learning uses a lot of matrix multiplication, and it doesn't need 32-bit or 64-bit precision. It can often get by with 16-bit or even 8-bit. And so, doing a bunch of simple int 8 cores is a way to boost performance a lot. Anyway, that's your die shot. A few things we'll get to as we talk about this a little bit. The display and video engine, like there are some changes there. They've added ProRes support for encode and decode, which it's not clear where on the die exactly that might be. It might be this bottom right section, or it might just be in the nebulous no man's land that I didn't annotate because I don't know what it is. Let's go ahead and talk about these things. So CPU cores.
real fast, media improvements are pretty important when it comes
Yeah.
to battery life, because a lot of people just sit there and watch video, and that is really, really important. They already have stellar battery life. That's an area that, those are smart.
Interesting point on the media stuff. It does not have AV1 support, so no boost to your Netflix battery life, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, CPU cores. These are largely unchanged, or are they changed compared to the previous
The
generation?
efficiency cores are a lot more efficient, but when it comes to the shared caches and things of that nature, it's really just you get for the shared L2 for the E cores is the same, but for the P cores you go up from 12 megabytes to 16 megabytes. Instruction caches are all the same. Data caches are the same. These cores are not significantly different. It's really a very small gain. The efficiency cores have been streamlined, so some of that is just probably wider pipes to bring in more throughput. So.
All right. Let's see. We've got a couple of questions. I think they're GPU related, so we'll hit those in a little bit. Performance. This is M1 versus M2. They're saying M2 is 25% faster at the same power.
Two
Alternatively,
cores, 25% more transistors, 20% more die area. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. 35% faster overall at a slightly higher power level.
Correct. And that's then, almost probably going to come from the power enhancements.
I got that wrong. I'm looking at GPU. I thought I had CPU first. I'm sorry. Anyway, so yeah, GPU 25% more. Like they went from 8 cores to 10 cores on their GPU. So that makes perfect sense. Let's see. CPU performance. This is what I wanted to see.
Yeah, the GPU stuff tells me that they didn't really rework the GPU architecture.
Yeah.
I don't think that they did. It's just, hey, let's throw on a few more cores. Now that sounds simple and it's easy to say, but there's some more.
But they do. Do they use automated chip layout stuff?
Oh, I am sure that they have access to the latest and the greatest EDA tools of anyone. So yes, absolutely. I mean, partially automated.
Let's see. And yeah, it's still work. So let's see. I'm getting my things out of order. I guess I thought I had slides showing the M1 versus M2 performance gains, but I guess I don't.
One of these interesting ones is that they do show that Intel still has a performance gain and performance lead over them with the 12 core. They can't match it.
Yeah, so this is, which is kind of interesting. Let me get to that in a second, but they compare it here against the i7 1255U in a Samsung Galaxy Book 2 360. And they're saying, hey, we're 1.9 times faster at the same power level, or we're the same speed with 1/4 the power.
In an unknown benchmark.
And that's the key. Like, there are benchmarks where we already know that Intel is faster. And so I suspect a lot of these benchmarks might be leveraging things like, what if it's ProRes encoding? Oh, guess what? They just added hardware dedicated ProRes encoding support to the M2. And so, yeah, it would be a lot more power efficient. And that's where these claims get really...
the company that claimed the Ultra was as fast as the 3090. So, but all companies are bad about performance projection. So this isn't just too specific to Apple.
Right. And let's see. So this is the 1255U. It's 10 core. That's... Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that 2 performance and 8 efficiency, or what's the?
I believe.
So that is kind of
comparisons are. Yeah.
I'm gonna quick check that because that's important. So it says here. This is looking that up on Intel's site. Yeah, 2 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores. So the efficiency cores are Intel's low power, and this is interesting because they show power at up to 30 watts, where that's the boost power from Intel. So I'm not quite sure how they're getting these numbers. All right, and then they show the 12 core. This is the 1260p, which is a let's see, that one is 6. No, wait, it's 4 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. So same efficiency cores. core count, but double the performance cores. And those performance cores are where Intel gets a lot of their snappiness and single-threaded performance. And so Apple admits that they're slower than this. It is a 28 watt TDP nominal on the Intel 12 core chip. Boost power again can go up to like 50 something watts, right? So
Well, they
1/4 the
listed as
power.
64, but you know how it goes with Intel. It might go a little bit higher than that. Power is going to remain Apple's strong point for sure.
Yeah. All right. So that takes care of the CPU, GPU. Again, architecturally, we don't think there's any real changes. They have 10 cores instead of 8 cores, larger L2 cache. I wrote an article about this, basically just saying like, hey, don't believe all the hype about this, new extremely potent GPU. It's not bad. It's good for integrated graphics, but like it's not really fast. 3.6 teraflops, has shared 100 gigabytes per second DDR5 memory from the system. Like that's not a lot. In fact, the Ryzen 7 6800U lands almost right in the same ballpark. And we know that that chip can handle 1080p medium at 30 to 60 frames per second, depending on the game. So that's really where Apple's GPU lands. And they make claims like I flipped out, those slides were out of order earlier, but is this one? No, those were the M1 versus M2. So those are their performance gains. All right, maybe I didn't have them out of order. Here we go. Against Intel, 15 watt TDP chips, 2.5 or 2.3 times faster. And then they say, and they can do the same performance at 1/5 the power. The important thing here is this is like beating the weakest kid on the block, like the Iris Xe 96 execution units. That's what's in the 1255U.
This is like, it's like a Ferrari beating a Yugo. Yugo doesn't even claim that it's a race car. So why would you do that? Intel does not claim that that is a gaming GPU on there or a rendering. Just even there, kind of like, okay, it's kind of like our stuff.
It's good for video transcoding and watching videos, and you can kind of sort of maybe game on it at 720p. Their Arc GPUs are supposed to be better, but I think they'll be higher power too. So, it's still, Apple is focusing a lot of energy on, or a lot of die space on GPU performance, and they're saying, hey, we're over twice as fast while using the same power. I really want to see how that compares to Ryzen 6800U. I suspect it's going to be a tie. And let's see. That's about it for the graphics. A couple of graphics questions before we leave that subject. Yes, GPUs took more space on the die. This is actually pretty common with some of the mobile chips and such, where GPUs are now getting a large chunk of the die area. Now, it's important to note, like, we've got P cores, E cores, L3 cache. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. How much of that is CPU related and how much of it is GPU related, it's hard to break down, but certainly they've invested a significant amount of die space into the GPU side of things. And then we also had someone ask about this. Serious question. Is it possible to game on Apple? Is there Game Pass or Stream? If so, will the GPU get me close to the RTX 3060? It is possible to game on Apple through Steam, but you have a limited selection of games that are available. Like, not all games work on Steam. I think the number is growing. I'm not positive, but I believe the Photon stuff that works with Linux is also helping with Apple. Maybe. Do you know anything about that, Paul?
No, I do not.
Okay.
To be honest.
All right.
I know that gaming support remains very limited. I do know that.
Yeah. The second part of that, will the GPU get me close to an RTX 3060? Unequivocally, no. Let's see. Where's my slide that showed this? Oh, sorry. It's hard to find my slides sometimes. Here we go. There. 3.6 teraflops. That's kind of your best case. A 3060 is like 12 teraflops. It's a lot faster. It's I think the 3050 is around 9 teraflops. Not all teraflops are created equal, but also you've got dedicated GDDR6 memory on the NVIDIA GPUs. I would suspect that you're basically looking at 3 times the performance with the 3060 compared to the Apple, maybe even a little bit more in some situations. 3060 can legitimately handle 1080p at ultra settings. The Apple GPU, I think you'll be looking at 1080p at medium settings and probably going for more than 30 frames per second as opposed to 60 frames per second or more. So hope that helps. All right, let's go on to memory. This is a little bit of an interesting one. 24 gigabytes unified memory maximum, 128-bit bus. That's nice, but that's the maximum. For a MacBook Air, I think that's fine. MacBook Pro, 24 gigabytes maximum sounds maybe a little limiting.
Well, it is a big jump up from the 16 that they had with the M1. So, I mean, that's also another area where they did improve because you're going from 16 gigabytes of LPDDR4X, 4266 to 24 gigabytes of LPDDR5. The memory throughput that they claim, which is pretty close to accurate, is 68 gigabytes a second with the M1 to 100 gigabits a second with this chip. So that's quite a big step forward.
Yep. Media engine. Talked a bit about this. They've still got H.264 or AVC and HEVC encoding and decoding at up to 8K. I'm not sure if they do 8K on HEVC and ProRes. ProRes has been added. That's new to the M2, which again, like when they talk about performance compared to Intel, they might be using one of those benchmarks that utilizes this hardware. It's very important for people who work in media, so it's not a bad thing to have it, but you know, it's like comparing performance with AVX 512 on a chip that supports it to performance without AVX 512 on, you know, an older generation chip. You can get a big boost in performance because you have new instructions. And that doesn't mean that everything supports those instructions or can even make use of them. Secure Enclave, Neural Engine, I don't really have anything to add about that other than, you know, we've said it already. Adds a lot of support for some of these AI workloads that are becoming increasingly common. And then last is, this is the high level overview. So here's the big picture. So has 50% more memory than the M1, better media engine, 40% faster neural engine with up to 16 trillion or 16 teraops per second compared to, it was 11 something before, I think. The CPU largely unchanged, just some optimizations, and they say they're 18% faster, mostly because of the E-cores. GPU got 25% more cores and clocks a little faster, so you get more GPU performance. DDR5 gives you more memory bandwidth, 50% more memory bandwidth, and we go from 16 billion transistors to 20 billion transistors. Basically, you know, an iterative update because they're stuck on the same node. It's going to be faster and better than the M1. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be competitive with Intel's latest and greatest for a laptop. I mean, but if you go to desktops and higher performance laptops, I think we'll need to wait for M2 Pro, M2 Max, and those chips to arrive.
Yes, and this update comes about a year and a half after they first released the M1. So that would suggest that's about their cadence. So a year and a half is a long time. I mean, M1, when Apple came out of the gate with M1, it blew the competition away. Now, AMD and Intel have both reduced some of those advantages. They still have plenty of advantages. Apple does. I mean, some of them are just, you know, a big problem they have is software support. and that remains an issue, especially with gaming. But there is time for Apple and AMD to answer with this one. It's not as clear cut of a victory. I think that you're starting to see the gap between the two narrow.
And of course, Intel is now talking about building stuff on TSMC's fabs. AMD uses TSMC fabs. So, when you're a generation ahead in terms of your process technology, that gives you a big advantage, which is what the M1 had for a while. We're still waiting on the 5 nanometer AMD and NVIDIA and Intel stuff to come out. So that's, the gap is closing. Zen 4 will be 5 nanometer. So will RDNA 3, so will the next generation NVIDIA, I'm not Hopper, I'm drawing a blank. Ada Lovelace GPUs. Let's see, some questions here. We've got, will the CPU improvement get me past Ryzen 6000 or 12th gen?
That's a tough question to answer. We haven't actually seen these in the wild, and Apple, like all companies, their benchmarks can be extremely misleading. So, that's something that we're going to have to wait till we will see, performance in the wild. One area where we'll definitely win is in battery life, but there are cases where Apple is not faster, and even in their own benchmarks, they showed that the M2 is slower than Intel under some conditions. Of course, Apple will have faster M2 versions that will probably be a better comparison against that chip. Absolutely. So we'll just have to see when silicon gets in the wild.
Yeah, the answer will be unequivocally sometimes that it will be faster.
Yes.
Ilias, ARM-based CPUs are now competing with x86. Yes, they actually are. And in fact, NVIDIA is making a big push on that in the supercomputer realm with Grace, their Grace CPU architecture, which is, what's the ARM chip called? Neoverse?
Yes, those are the data center cores.
Yeah.
Off-the-shelf data center cores that anybody can buy. It's a big difference here is the operating model. With x86, you can't just go and say, "Oh, hey, my name's Jim and I want to buy an x86 core." No, you have to create it. But with those types of cores, with ARM, you absolutely can. You can go and say to ARM, "Hey, my name's Bob and I want to buy the CPU cores and a reference design and build my own chip." And there you go. You're done. Well, you're not done, but they'll let you do it. And you have Qualcomm that's also entering this space, and they're very serious. They've been working on this a while. So when they come in, they'll see even more competition. For desktop PCs, ARM is right now at 10% of share for desktop PCs, almost solely through Apple.
Yeah.
When Qualcomm comes in, it's going to increase.
This is an interesting one related to that, right? Would we ever see ARM-based PC motherboards in the future?
I would say yes, of course.
Yeah.
But the question is will they have socketed processors? Will they have socketed memory? Will you be able to do anything to them other than buy them? If you buy it and you plug it in and that's all you can do. The BIOS entry is just the clock, for the system timer, not the clock speed, not the memory speed, nothing. A black box motherboard. Sure, you'll see that in time.
Those already exist, really. That's
Yes.
Raspberry Pi in a nutshell, right?
Yes, sir.
And there's a lot of Raspberry Pi competitors.
There, but yeah.
Yeah.
But what form will that take? We don't know. Socketed processors, almost assuredly not.
Not for a long time. This was one of the things I wondered about with NVIDIA buying ARM. If that had gone through, I think there would have been more potential for NVIDIA to do something in the PC space. They still could. Someone else still could, but it will take longer. Qualcomm's probably our best bet. Can you still run Windows on Mac? This is a maybe. There's a distro working to get Windows booting on Macs. Yeah. I don't believe it is working yet, but I haven't looked into that, so I can't say for sure. What's the price difference between M2 laptops and equivalent Ryzen 6000 or 12th gen laptops? Is there a value proposition? This is interesting because it used to be Apple was very expensive, and I used to review a lot of laptops back in my Anand Tech days. But there, after Apple made their really impressive MacBook Air and some of their other updated MacBook Pros, you had other companies coming in being like, oh, let's make a Windows version of that. And it had worse battery life, sometimes better performance, sometimes worse performance. But the fact of the matter is, most people aren't going to be willing to pay Apple prices for not Apple products. So, an Asus or Acer or Dell or whoever laptop that performs nearly the same as an Apple MacBook, but maybe doesn't have quite the materials engineering and doesn't have the custom OS and all that stuff. Like, I wouldn't pay as much for it. And we're still dealing with that, where you see like the Asus ZenBook S13 OLED. I think that's the 6800U that we talked about a few weeks ago with Andrew. And that has the Ryzen 6800U. And it's probably like a $1,600 or $1,800 laptop. And you go, well, wait a second. If you already like Macs, why would you pay more for an Asus laptop? So that about wraps things up. I think, like, we'll wait and see what M2 does in actual performance. I'd love to benchmark it on some games and do some real world comparisons, but it's difficult because most games are made for Windows. So, you got to find things that work on both Windows and Mac. We've got AMD's Financial Analyst Days going on shortly. So that's going to
Very shortly.
Yeah, sure to be some exciting news. Paul and I are working on writing stuff up for that. You can actually tune into that, I think, even if you're not a financial analyst. It's live streamed, and they'll probably be talking about their upcoming products. So that's exciting. Very exciting, right, Paul?
Yes, we may be in a hurry because there's so many exciting things that
we might be cutting this show a little short.
Happen, maybe, or may or may not happen.
So that starts in about an hour and a half. So if you are into AMD products and want to see what's going on, I would highly recommend tuning into that and listening to our coverage. All right, that's about it for today. Yes. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.